Dr. Paul Gottfried, why are most people oblivious to the problems of political correctness and ideological manipulation?
Well, I think there's several answers to this. I think in most cases, certainly most people that I meet, even if they do not believe in the premises of political correctness, which are taught in public education, which they will pick up certainly from the media, from the entertainment industry, are very much focused on their own lives, getting ahead, making money, for people my age, visiting their children and grandchildren. And what may affect the society ideologically doesn't really matter. Most people are non-ideological. They're oblivious to what is going on unless they get thrown in prison or are denied minimal subsistence level advantages. Among groups, though, that are politically aware, there are many people who are given victim status, although there's obviously a hierarchy of victims. Obviously, if you're gay or black or whatever, there's certain groups that are featured as victims. They're more prominent in the media. Their suffering, their exposure to bigotry are going to be much more emphasized. But let's say even if you're a woman looking for a job, you know that there are laws which prevent discrimination against you, which are being supported by both major political parties and by candidates for public office. If women are depicted as a victim group, this gives you a leg up in terms of finding a position. So there are lots of groups that benefit in one way or another by the emphasis on victimhood and the teaching of political correctness. Finally, I would say that this diversity or multicultural ideology with its attendant hierarchy of victims and victimizers is the post-Christian religion of the West. It is taught everywhere, inside and outside of churches. And to the extent that people do have religious moral beliefs, they reflect political correctness. This is my experience. Now, it's not that everybody is running to give their houses to minorities or to make sure that their white children marry blacks or Hispanics in order to show how liberal they are. But to the extent that people are seen as moral, decent, nice, and sensitive, they are supposed to believe in multiculturalism and supposed to recognize that there are certain historic victims, and the others are supposed to make amends to them through social policy, economic redistribution.
Why have you been so critical of the conservative movement?
Well, I think the conservative movement has been complicit in all of this. Right now, you have an election in New York in which the neoconservative press, which has become the establishment conservative press, is backing a liberal Democrat who is seen at gay prides with his daughter, Andrew Cuomo, against an Italian Catholic candidate who dared to suggest that homosexuality is not an acceptable lifestyle. The conservative movement is always very happy to be reconciled with social liberals as long as it can get its way on other issues, for instance, foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, and certain kinds of economic changes, economic policy changes that benefit corporations that give money to conservatives or movement conservative politicians. They do not represent any kind of establishment challenge, and they're much more concerned with maintaining friendship within the policy community or the media community, of which they are an integral part, than they are with standing up for traditional social positions.
Do you see any solution to the problem?
Do I see any solution to this problem? Yes, I think if problems become much more acute, that is to say, if government favors in some very discriminatory or gross fashion certain groups at the expense of others, there's going to be at least an outcry. I think the Democratic Party is sitting on a volcano, by the way. I think that the victim groups that line up with the Democrats are making competing demands, blacks and Hispanics, Jews and blacks and so forth. I don't think these are compatible groups in the end. So I see tensions within the political system that are going to arise out of competing claimants for favors and victim status. That I see as one source of conflict that is going to continue and probably become more acute in the future. Another thing is I think more and more people are becoming aware of the fact that they're being manipulated, even if they do allow themselves to be manipulated. I think at some level there is popular unhappiness with this. You saw this in Connecticut, which is probably the most liberal state in the Union, in Stefano versus Ritchie case, when you had an Irish-Italian firefighting force complaining they would be denied promotion because it was being given to blacks who scored lower on occupational tests. In my opinion, actually, the Sotomayor and the others who founded for the minorities were probably interpreting the Civil Rights Act accurately. But the other side argued on the basis of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, their rights were being denied. Now, this has not created enough of a stir to change the political climate in Connecticut, and I suspect the Italians and the Irish are going to continue to vote for liberal Democrats as opposed to liberal Republicans because of the choices you have in Connecticut. But I think the level of discontent has gone up somewhat. Not enough to change the system, but certainly to create tensions within the system.
You mentioned a level of discontent.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a point of no return on this? Is there a point where we've gone too far?
Well, I don't know whether we've gone too far, but looking at European countries, they have gone too far. I see no way that Germany is ever going to return. Despite years of, well, perhaps because of years of political indoctrination in which Germans told that they're subhuman, they've started every war in human history, and they could only atone for this by handing over their country to Muslim immigrants and by allowing themselves to be merged with the European Union. Their country has ceased to be a nation state. I don't know what it is. It's simply waiting. It's a collection of yuppies and welfare state beneficiaries waiting to be taken over by the EU, producing very few offspring, and being colonized by Muslims. I think there are other countries in Europe, like Spain, which present an almost equally bleak, future for a multicultural country. I don't think we're quite at that point, but I'm not sure these European countries can come back from where they are. Well, I think much of Western Europe is ruined, irretrievably, irreversibly ruined by the amount of multicultural indoctrination and the application of multicultural policies through which they have passed in recent decades. Now,
if I could play devil's advocate,
right?
What would you say to someone that says, for example, you may say that Europe is unfixable, but
Mm-hmm.
at the same point, we haven't seen any major wars in Europe like World War I and World War II for 50 years.
Yeah, you'd be unlikely to see any major wars in Europe in the last 50 or 60 years because they bled themselves white in 2 world wars. Okay, there's no reason to assume they would be going to war with each other if it were not for the European Union. What they basically have done is turn their cities into centers of civil strife because of the presence of large Muslim populations that they cannot integrate into their societies. But the notion that somehow they'd all be killing each other were it not for the European Union or not for their weakened national sense and the triumph of multiculturalism in Europe, I don't think is a particularly sound refutation of my position. I don't think there were any wars in the cards. The major problem, of course, was the polarization between the United States and the Soviet Union, in which the battlefield was likely to be Europe. But Europe was playing a very minor role. Moreover, in the 1950s, there was a much stronger sense of nationhood in Europe than there is now. And they were not going to war. I mean, Germans still had a sense of being German. The French under de Gaulle had a sense of being French. Spain was ruled by a very reactionary leader, Franco. But Europeans still had a profound sense of national identity back in the 1950s. Even, you know, and they were willing to cooperate. They create the coal iron community. They even signed the Treaty of Rome, which may have been the slippery slope leading to the European Union. But you did see European countries that both had a sense of themselves as nations, and yet they were willing to cooperate, and there was no likelihood of European countries going to war. There are many groups that benefit, but they benefit differentially. That is to say, you know, blacks certainly benefit, or certain blacks. Not all blacks benefit. Certain blacks benefit. Not the black underclass. They get nothing out of this. But the black middle class women who are given privileged access to positions, black women in particular. Some Hispanics, although not all Hispanics, benefit from this. But in a more general way, certain groups derive, but for instance, Hispanics derive benefit, because people cannot come out against immigration because they feel that this would, brand them as racist or bigots. So all the Republican candidates are now running saying, we want legal immigration, we want more immigration. This is their position now, except for Tancredo in Colorado, who says he does not want more immigration, but this makes him stand out. And even on Fox News, he is characterized as a maverick and an exception. So I think the Hispanics do benefit in terms of the general immigration situation from this. Other groups get a kind of emotional benefit, Jews, for instance, because they're treated as victims of white Christian civilization. And they're allowed to say things about other people that other people can't say about Jews. The Irish, a little more. Italians, actually, I think, in New York City school system are treated as a privileged minority. I think it's City University of New York. They've made it all the way up to victim or semi-victim status. So, I mean, the other ones can always hope that they will rise in the victim hierarchy. But I would say that it's probably the black middle-class women are right now the major beneficiaries of the spoils system.
What would you say to the guy that says all of this deep thought and all of this intellectual process is really just a cover for deep-seated racism?
Well, that wouldn't have any effect on my thinking. I mean, let us assume this person is right. Let us say that everyone who is doing this in his heart, its heart of hearts, is an extreme racist. What I'm looking at is the action and the effect of the actions, right? Of course, part of what drives the system is the sense of sin. I mean, I don't think it's simply technological development or, because of the economy. We think in terms of being part of a single. I think the white male Western Christian is made to feel guilty. It's almost, as I said, it's a kind of replacement Christian theology. You're made to feel, and no matter how you search your heart, no matter what good you do, you remain depraved. You're in a state of original sin. I mean, I hear this all the time. But I think what the psychology leads to is a willingness to do even more, to have something similar to what my colleague Trifkovich described as, is going on in Europe, or Derek Turner said is going on in England, that we're going to have to push people around even more in order to root out the remnants of racism.
How has H.L. Mencken affected your life?
Well, he has not affected my life recently. He affected me as a very young man, about 50 years ago. And I read him, and I really liked his pose, and I liked his Nietzscheanism. Because even then, I despised egalitarianism, to be perfectly honest about the matter. And I enjoyed the way he poked holes, in the illusions of self-important people. There were things that he wrote that I thought were, going overboard. For instance, attacks on these Southerners. They become even then they had become punching bags. But I liked his anti-egalitarianism. I also like his guts for opposing America's entry into World War I. He was perfectly right on that point. Something for which the neoconservatives have recently been attacking him. And he was not a personally bigoted man, but he never held back from making, we say, edgy remarks about groups. Remember his famous remark about who is an anti-Semite, a person who hates Jews more than is, or dislikes Jews more than is absolutely necessary. It was a very clever remark. He was once, describing some dinner companion who was a German Jewish banker. My own family are German Jewish bankers, but he said this person had horrible eating habits. He chewed his food too loudly. I thought that was dire. I thought it was a very amusing remark. And he's very uninhibited about saying these things. He is not a vicious person at all, but he was in no way controlled by the touchstones of political correctness by which our lives are now being organized or supposed to be organized.